I'd like to call a subcommittee on our higher education for the Committee on Education and Health to order. Please call the roll.
Senator Van Valkenburg,
Here.
Senator Aird, Senator Head, Senator Pillion, Senator Locke.
Here.
You have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and get started with the bills that we have before us. Senator Rouse. And I do believe you have a substitute.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. Yes, I have substitute.
We need to adopt this. Moved and seconded that the substitute be adopted. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed? We have the substitute before us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And basically, the substitute just cleared up some language around for you. But SB 678 was drafted in collaboration with the University of Virginia, and I take a deep breath as I say
What was
that. With Virginia Tech, ECU, JU, ODU, and Liberty University to ensure that the Virginia student athletes and institutions are protected with regard to NIL or image, name, and likeness, and that Virginia institutions remain competitive. This legislation would provide Virginia student athletes and institutions a significant competitive advantage. Acting now allows Virginia institutions opportunity to establish the most appropriate infrastructure to maximize benefits to each sport and all student athletes. Current NCAA rules prevent institutions from compensating student athletes for their NIL. These rules have empowered collectives to become very influential in intercollegiate athletics. Unfortunately, not all collectives are providing NIL opportunities and/or services to student athletes in an equitable or thoughtful manner consistent with the values of the institution. If institutions are permitted to better engage in NIL activities and permitted to compensate student athletes for their NIL, they can ensure opportunities are equitable, compliant with Title IX, and more accessible for student athletes. Madam President, I also have experts here from the University of Virginia to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Senator Rouse. Any questions or comments from the committee?
Madam Chair,
Senator Pillion.
was I correct in hearing that he said UVA took the lead on this?
He did. Okay. Are there those here in support of the bill?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Elizabeth Hooper with Virginia Tech. We strongly support the bill and appreciate the senator's willingness to help out his alma mater.
I'm sorry, what school did you say you were from?
Virginia Tech.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Others in support? Is there anyone? Oh, okay.
Good morning. My name is Carla Williams. I'm Director of Athletics at the University of Virginia, and we strongly support this proposed legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone here in opposition? Okay. We have.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, I just walked in, and I'm not in opposition. We had asked that there be some corrections to the part that had to do with disclosure, and I appreciate the senator's willingness to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have the substitute to Senate Bill 678 before us.
Second.
Moved and seconded that the amendment in the nature of a substitute for Senate Bill 678 be recommended for reporting. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Thank you, Senator Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
Senator Reeves, if you don't mind, I'd like to take Senator Servo. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's do 506 first. I think that's the shorter of the two.
Okay. Senate Bill 506. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, I do have a substitute. So, forgot about that. Oh, I'm sorry. The Uber chair wanted me to make an amendment. I forgot. So this includes an amendment she'd suggested. So if we could move the substitute.
There's just an amendment, not a substitute?
It's a substitute.
Okay. So there's a substitute for Senate Bill 506.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we adopt a substitute. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? So we have a substitute for Senate Bill 506
Thank you.
before us.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. So the substitute does not change the substance of what you had in the main bill. The Uber Chair, Senator Hashmi, wanted to add language about a faculty representative on the Board of Visitors, a non-voting faculty rep on the Board of Visitors. Right now, there's an option for that. She wanted to be mandated that there's a non-voting faculty rep on every Board of Visitors. And that's what the substitute adds compared with the original bill. So in addition to that, the purpose of the main bill was to clarify the general counsel situation at each university and to clarify where the Board of Visitors' duty of loyalty lies. Do you have a question? Okay. All right. So I learned about this sort of, I've been sort of asking some questions over the last few years, but somebody who was with the Mary Sue Terry administration reminded me that in that administration, the AG's office slowly started taking over general counsel's offices at each university. They used to be internal to each school. And then as legal things grew more and more complex, they started asking the AG for more help. And eventually, sort of over time, over the last 2 decades, the AG's office kind of took control of all the general counsel's offices in each school. The problem, from my perspective, is that what this creates is that conflicts can arise between the AG and the schools because politics doesn't always equate to being a lawyer. And for those of you who don't practice law, an attorney has a duty of loyalty to their client. So, for example, if somebody were to hire me for a divorce, I can't go out and have a press conference about it without my client's consent, and I can't stand up and attack my client's position in their divorce case because that's disloyal to my client, who's my principal, and I'm their agent. And so the problem that arises when you have a political elected person in charge of legal advice is it creates a real tension. And that's why in a lot of states, they statutorily require the general counsel to be hired by the governing body for the institution and not be subject to the political system. So that I think it's the states of Michigan, Oregon, and Kentucky, which I took some of the language for this bill from, the general counsel's office is completely separate, hired by the institutions. That's what this bill does. If you look at lines 32 through 40, I think, it says that the Board of Visitors is charged with hiring the general counsel or the chief legal officer for each school. And it also says that the AG can be involved in the legal representation upon the request of the school. It also says the AG has to approve any legal settlement that's over $5 million. And it also says for some of the smaller institutions, I picked 7,500 students or less, which I just pulled that out of the air, that they have to choose whether or not to opt into an AG system or whether they control their own counsel. So they have to make a choice, and then there's a structure in here about what date they have to make that election and notify the money committees. So that's what lines 32 through 40 do. Then if you go to 85 through 135, that clarifies the duties of a general counsel. And I ran this by a whole bunch of different people trying to figure out the different things that a general counsel would do in terms of giving advice or working on contracts, hiring outside counsel, the kinds of things that a general counsel for a major organization would be involved in. And then I also put in here that there has to be an annual report about the use of outside counsel, because often if some matter, like a litigation matter arises or some big transaction, it's necessary for the general counsel to hire an outside law firm to help assist with a problem if they don't have the capacity or the expertise. I think right now the AG already has to issue some kind of report for the use of outside counsel, so this sort of parallels that. And then lines 169, 185, and 358 to the end, that was Senator Hashmi's request about the faculty rep. Most of it's just a bunch of existing text. And then the last policy change is on lines 303 to 308. And this has to do with where the Board of Visitors' duty of loyalty lies. The AG issued an opinion I think it was about 4 or 5, 6 months ago now, that said that the Board of Visitors' primary duty of loyalty lies to the Commonwealth and not their institution that they're charged with overseeing. That's created a lot of confusion. I've had visitors who've called me who don't understand it. They thought they were, to be the Board of, they're supposed to be the visitor for that school, not for the state. There is a role for them exercising a judgment about what's in the interest of the state, but to say that they're primarily loyal to the state and not their institution is not consistent with what I think most visitors think they're there for. And for example, if you're talking about a board, if you're on like a board for a corporation or something like that, your loyalties to the company, to the charity, to the whatever, not to the state first and then the entity second. We're the ones who have a duty of loyalty to the state, not visitors. And so this clarifies that confusion. So those are the three big policy changes it makes. But from my perspective, it'll make our general counsel's offices work a lot more consistently with the way that general counsels work in most large organizations. And it clarifies the duty of loyalty. And then, like I said, Senator Hashmi had her faculty thing to provide better advice, I think, or to make sure that the faculty's voice is heard in university governance matters. That's what the bill does, Madam Chair. I'm happy to take any questions. And that's what it does. And there's also budget language that implements all this as well. There's a budget amendment that implements all this. There's a lot of surgery that has to happen in the budget in order for this to happen because money has to move around like 14 different schools.
Thank you, Senator Servo. Senator Ayer.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Servo, I wanted to clarify structurally the specific part of the language around general counsel. And so if I recall correctly, essentially the Attorney General's office has a section that's specifically for the attorneys that work with our higher ed institutions. And that can be an attorney specifically assigned and designated to a particular school. It could be an attorney assigned to work for multiple schools. And so with this change, would we be entirely eliminating that section in the AG's office? And in particular, should I wait? Let me just start there. Yeah.
The answer is probably mostly. It obviously depends on what happens on the budget side. The Finance Committee has to look at this and figure out how to move money and all that. But for the bigger schools, the budget authority and the positions would then transfer to the school. The Board of Visitors would have to hire the general counsel who could then, take people or hire people under them. Some of the smaller schools, I would not anticipate would opt into this structure. And again, the way this is written, schools are allowed to ask the AG's office for help if they want it. So some of the stuff you're talking about has to be sorted out on the budget side and in the budget language, which is something I've been talking to Senate finance staff about for about a month or two, and we're 3 now. I have not spoken to the AG's office about it. I mean, I spoke with Mr. Slemp about it about 3 weeks ago, and Deputy AG Bell is here this morning. He told me they're going to oppose, but we haven't had any further dialogue with the AG's office about implementation about it yet.
Senator Ayer.
Just a further follow-up question. And so this wouldn't in any way prohibit the smaller institutions from perhaps working with a general counsel that may be, if they wanted to procure the same individual working with another institution. Because I know, for example, for some smaller schools, they do work with an attorney that is also working with another institution.
I think they probably could do that. The only thing they'd have to worry about is conflicts of interest, and I doubt the conflicts don't arise all the time. But in local government, general counsel's offices sort of will pool resources for procurements and things like that. But it probably depends on the nature of the legal problem. But I think they could probably talk to each other. And again, this allows them to hire outside counsel if they want. I don't see any reason why a school couldn't pay another school for help or something like that. I know when I raised this with some of the schools, one of their immediate concerns was, whether they're going to get the money to hire the lawyers for all this. And that's why the budget amendment's necessary.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Head.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm puzzled by this, because this strikes me that this is trying to make our public institutions into private institutions, our public universities into private universities, which they are not. They are public universities. And when you're talking about council, I can envision that there would be situations where two universities would end up being on opposite sides of something and have opposing counsel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a real problem. A real problem, whereas as opposed to when you've got one council, one office that is currently representing both. I think this just scares me. This really is. I know that there's been a lot of push, particularly for one of our state universities that would really love not to be a state university anymore. And obviously I'm opposed to that. These are public universities, and I don't understand why we would create a situation that would put one more step away from them being that. Likewise, with the idea that loyalty for a Board of Visitors, these are public institutions, and they fall under the umbrella of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And consequently, I think all the decisions have to be made in the best interest of the Commonwealth, not just in the best interest of the institution at a particular time. If those two things are in conflict, then the Commonwealth wins. And if loyalty isn't there, then those decisions are going to be, you're setting up a situation where we really, you're putting us in a position that later you're going to have some public outcry that's going to cause some additional legislation that's going to come down the road that I think it could be catastrophically bad. Can you address some of those concerns?
Sure. So I think you're exactly highlighting why this is a problem and why this needs to get fixed. An attorney cannot represent two people who are on opposite sides of a position, of a legal position. It is unethical. I can lose my license for that. So, for example, say that UVA or Virginia Tech, one or the other, but not both, decides they want to leave the ACC, and decides the other school says, we don't want you to leave the ACC. The same lawyer cannot give legal advice to both. It's unethical. A lawyer could lose their license for doing that. It's like trying to counsel two people on the opposite sides of the same transaction. As an attorney, you could lose your license for that. In addition, as an attorney, you can't make a public statement attacking one of your clients like that. And so that tension is why it's absolutely necessary that they have separate lawyers. If there's a conflict, that's for us to resolve as a legislature, not for their attorney to try to mediate. That's not how it works practicing law.
An attorney that can represent one company that might have two departments that are in conflict and give advice to both of those departments. Yes.
Right.
And there's that's more what I see that you're getting in this situation. If you've got two different universities that are ultimately part of the Commonwealth of Virginia, that's more what I would say that you were dealing with, to be able to say help sort this out, to get everybody on the same page, because we should be rowing the boat in the same direction.
No, that's first of all, the difference between a corporation is there's a CEO that makes the decision about who's right and who's wrong under the company, and the attorney advises the CEO. That's not what we have in Virginia. With our universities, we've created these boards of visitors to run these universities independently. That's why we have the level 3 agreements, which we give them separate authority. They're not subject to all the procurement rules and a lot of other rules. So we give them discretion to run their body independently. The governor is not in charge of the universities, and the governor can't resolve conflicts between UVA and Tech. He can't tell UVA, you can join the ACC, or you can stay in the ACC, but Tech, you can't. And I'm not saying the ACC because I've heard that that's happening. There was some talk about both of them leaving or something, but I can give you some other examples too. I can give you lots of examples of the AG's office being at odds with institutions of higher ed, not just this AG, but others in the past. But in our system, we don't have a system where the governor runs the universities. And that's why, if we're going to have independent boards that make independent decisions, they have to have independent counsel, or else the lawyer can't give them advice without losing their license. That's how it works.
Senator Servo, If I may ask, can you give us an indication or information relative to what gave rise to this?
Well, I've been watching the Attorney General argue with our schools over the last 2 years about a couple different policies, and I've seen it happen in the past, where our Attorney General will argue with some position a Board of Visitors has taken publicly. And I've always scratched my head about how that's possible. And then when I saw the AG's opinion come out 4 months ago about the duty of loyalty, that kind of crystallized it for me in my head that that there's an inconsistency within right now between how the AG views the schools and the current reality of having these separate level 3 agreements where we ask these boards to operate independently. And as an attorney who practices law, I'm sitting there looking at this whole thing going like, this makes no sense as a lawyer. And that's what crystallized it for me. And I started having discussions with some other people about it. And, you know, they agreed with me that these tensions create lots of conflict and lots of confusion. And ever since I've put the bill in, I've had several people on boards of visitors tell me this is desperately needed because there's so much confusion that's been created.
Senator Van Valkenburg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe I'll ask a question that's really a statement, and you can just tell me if I'm right. I think what you're getting at is, you know, there's some states that have a unified structure, New York and North Carolina, California, Pennsylvania is moving towards a unified structure. And in a world in which you have a unified structure, some of the policy or some of the ways that our attorney structure and board structure have ebbed towards would make sense, but we don't. We have intentionally created a decentralized, independent system here where each college, for good or bad, is kind of its own fiefdom. And as a result of that, it makes more sense to have both independent counsel, but also when you're thinking about how the board acts, right? They have to be responsible to that institution. And it's a policy choice for us, right, to decide what's best for the Commonwealth. And if we wanted to change that structure, that's a whole different conversation. But with the structure we have, for the system to make sense, these boards need a certain level of autonomy, but also they need independent counsel.
Amen.
Okay, are there those here who are in support of Senate Bill 506?
Madam Chair, my name is Brian Turner. I'm here representing the Virginia Conference of the American Association of University Professors and the Faculty Senate of Virginia. We thank Senator Surville for bringing this bill. It does now with a substitute 3 things that we think are very, very important: giving the boards autonomy to exercise the fiduciary responsibilities to serve the public interest across a long term, to make sure their institutions are, of course, following federal and state law, but also making decisions that will keep those institutions both solvent and healthy and thriving to serve the public interest in the long term. Senator Surville gave a nice précis on the history we've seen over the last several decades of attorney generals, not because of their particular politics, but simply because it's a partisan position, providing the kind of advice that is oftentimes in conflict with what we would see as the long-term interests of the institutions, and also the addition of the faculty representative on the board, a non-voting voice of the faculty on the board is something we believe very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Others in support? Those in opposition?
Is this yours? Yeah, these are all the secret notes. Madam Chair, good morning. It's nice to see you in this different capacity. I feel like I should say I love what you've done with the place. Madam Chair, my name is Rob Bell. I'm the Deputy Attorney General who oversees, is one of my sections, the higher ed section. And the office respectfully asks you not to support this bill. We have no position on the amendment that was made this morning. I understand there's no changes to the rest of it, but we're not here to talk about the makeup of the board with regards to a faculty member. It's the other 2 provisions that the senator spoke about. And we would, I guess, begin by saying we do think this is a substantial step. It's not a small bill. It'll have a profound change on the relationship between the schools and the state, and then how those relate to their council. Now, before I forget, I was listening to Senator Aird's, I almost said delegate, I apologize. Senator Aird's questions about how the section is structured. There are 44 lawyers who work in the higher ed, 44 slots in the higher ed. There's a couple of openings. And what has happened is over the years, almost all of them now are assigned out to the field. So you have an office in Charlottesville, an office in Blacksburg, an office in Norfolk. But they're all OAG employees, meaning they all work for a central office. One of the benefits of that, I think, is what you were alluding to, would be when usually a smaller school has a question that has come up and they may only have one counsel full-time in their office, they can seek specialized support in two ways. They can seek it from the central office, and this happened recently on an employment issue where we were able to consult with the employment lawyers in another section. And then they can talk within the section, and so it's not at all uncommon for the larger offices, UVA, VCU, Tech, to have someone who is full-time specialized on a single thing. And when the smaller school, they maintain listservs and they get together once a month, but on a specific question, they can say, it comes up to us in Richmond, we go, wait a minute, I think there's somebody at VCU that recently had that issue, and then we direct the VCU person to talk with them. And so with everybody working together, you have a larger set of resources for the person that has a problem. If you start pulling the schools out, then obviously that shrinks the pool. We don't have a large section in Richmond office at all. Almost everybody is farmed out, and so if UVA, Tech, VCU went their separate ways, those lawyers would not be available if there was a sort of what I'd call an unusual question from a ODU or a Norfolk State or something like that. They just wouldn't be in part of the pool. In terms of the two issues that the senator is trying to address or says that the bill addresses, the first is this issue about where the primary duty lies for the board. And this is a big change. I understand it's being described as a clarification, but again, it would say word for word that the primary duty of the Board of Visitors of each Virginia public institution, it currently we would say is to the Commonwealth, and this would flip it to, the words would say the primary duty to the citizens, start over, I apologize, is to the institution. The AG's opinion that he refers to said it was to the Commonwealth. Now, the issue that this would arise would be when there is a conflict between those two. So if, in fact, the most obvious would be admissions. We have some schools that could double tomorrow their admissions. UVA tomorrow could double its admissions, and it would work its way through the system such that some of the smaller schools would really have trouble meeting their admission targets. Whereas UVA has a big endowment, many of the schools, if you look at a Radford, if you look at Mary Washington, CNU, Norfolk State, they're dependent on their tuition. If they don't have the kids come, they can't just tap the endowment, go get it elsewhere. If we want to have a system that has some cohesiveness, we do need something to have an obligation larger than just to the unique self-interest of the institution. So we do think that if that's something that you want to maintain, if you want to have a higher level of sort of system-wide control, you do want the board to have an obligation not just to that school's narrow self-interest, but to the larger. Now, the senator's right. If this was private corporations, that's what the company does. The company says, if you're Ford Motor Company, we don't care about GM. We don't care about, what do you drive, a Tesla? A Tesla. We just care about Ford. We do think, and I don't mean this as just OAG, but we think as Virginia that we want to have a system that's a little more cohesive. They take directions from the General Assembly. Boards are appointed by the governor but approved by you. This is not a private corporation just trying to make money or some other else. It's supposed to be for the higher purpose of educating the kids in Virginia. We think that's a substantial change. And so we would respectfully suggest that's not a change that's well taken. Okay. The second change is this issue about the council for the schools. We think there's both specific and efficiency reasons to keep it the way it is. In answering Senator Aird's issue, we've addressed some of them, but we do now have government lawyers who are highly specialized in the work they do, things that only come up in this context. So sovereign immunity is a big one. We have certain contracting rules that are only applying FOIA. Those don't apply outside, and so you would be wanting to bring together specialized lawyers that just do that. We think there's an efficiency to having those be attorney general lawyers. The second is what we talked about with Senator Aird. Having a pool of lawyers who can immediately address it enables especially the smaller schools to have access to these resources. And then to the mothership, we have, a couple hundred lawyers altogether. there's often able to find a specific lawyer that can help you with a project that would not be available if you had a 3 or 4 person office. They would have to go out of house. Now, we do go out of house, as the senator described already, so if you have a highly complicated issue, if we have a manpower issue, we already seek out of house counsel. We would anticipate that would happen a lot more frequently with substantial costs. We do think we save money. Last, again, it's a philosophical issue, but being able to speak with one voice has benefits. The ability to say that we are a single sovereign and our analysis is on a certain legal issue X, it should be X across. And so we represent, oh goodness, VDOT, DMV, DMAS. It is not uncommon for them to have legal issues. We then provide advice to the client. And in this case, we would suggest that it's a public corporation. These are not private schools, and would ask you respectfully to decline to pass the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Others in opposition?
Just want to make clear, I started drafting this before Mr. Bell was hired to run this department.
Senator Ayer.
Madam Chair, speaking to the bill.
Okay.
Senator Servo, I appreciate much of what you're trying to do with this bill as it pertains to the board structure, faculty representation, and I even appreciate what you're trying to do as it pertains to ensuring our institutions have concentrated representation on their needs and any positions that are specific and unique to them, particularly as you describe the ethical dilemma that may present itself from an attorney representing more than one institution or even just being located in the Attorney General's office. But for me, as it pertains to, as I think about the smaller institutions, I see where you're trying to go, but I don't think it's fully fleshed out. I think there are a number of unanswered questions that I think about, especially when I think about the discrepancy of funding available to the smaller schools. They are all not also level 3. And the additional burden that could be placed on them to have some issues resolved, but having to hire entirely outside counsel in some instances. And so I will be abstaining from your bill today, but I'm hoping that before we get to full or as it continues to move forward, that we can perhaps work out some of these kinks, because I do think those questions need to be answered. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
Senator Sarvell.
So just ask Senator Aird when she gets a chance to look at lines 115 to 121, which is the language for the smaller schools to stay in the existing system they're in, so they can continue to rely on the AG's office. They have to notify the chairs of Senate Finance and Chair of House of Probes that they want to stay in. And then the intent was to have some budget language that lived with that, so that the positions, or so many positions, wouldn't transfer with it, so that there still would be staffing in the AG's office to be able to support those schools in the way they saw fit. So that's when I raised this with some people who know a lot more about this than I do, they suggested exactly what you said, was that there'd be some smaller schools that might not want to have their own completely independent counsel. And so that's why we built this into the bill. So I'm still talking to money committees about the exact logistics of how to pull that off in a budget context, but that was what we came up with in the short term.
Senator Van Valkenburg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a clarifying question maybe for Senator Servo, which is to say, let's say those small schools did want to opt in to the structure that this bill creates. If they opted into that structure, and let's say they don't have the same amount of resources to have a fully fleshed out legal team, would they still be able to take advantage of using the Attorney General's office as needed?
Yeah, and that, I think, was Senator Aird's first question. And if you look on line 35 and 36, it says that the AG can provide legal service upon the request of the governing board. And then if you go to, it also says pursuant to 23.1-102.2, which is this new code section. And under that, it also says in here somewhere that that on lines 109 to 114, that the AG may appear, commence, prosecute, defend any lawsuit, or provide legal advice on questions related to affairs of the institution upon the request of the governing board or upon the institution's delegation of authority pursuant to subsection D, which is the thing I talked about a second ago, where you opt in or opt out of what it would be the new structure. So the answer is yes, but those are the specific lines that authorize that.
So, quick follow-up, Madam Chair.
Senator Van Valkenburg.
Yeah, so speaking to the bill, I'm going to support it because I think to that point, this really comes down to a philosophical question about how you think the schools should be governed. And I think there's a lot to be said for a unified structure that some of these other states have for driving down costs, but that's a discussion for a different day. And we have the system we've had for a long time. And I think within the system that we have, I do think it's important, since we do have this decentralized model, that we have people that are looking out for those universities. And I think Senator Serval said this at one point, but it's really on us to be the ones that are looking out for the Commonwealth and to be forcing them to act in that regard. And I think it's on them to try to make sure that their institution is as healthy as possible. And I think one of the reasons why I'm going to support this bill is I don't think we should be putting that responsibility on others when it's our job. And I think that, a lot of these institutions, they do have diverse goals, they do have diverse interests, and I think it's important that the board be able to take that into account, and then we bring the whole picture in. And so that's why I'll be voting yes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, we have Senate Bill 506, amendment in the nature of a substitute. Okay, I'll second the motion. Okay, we have a motion to report Senate Bill 506, amendment in the nature of a substitute, and a second. All
I
those in
think it
favor,
has to go to
please.
finance too. So.
I'm sorry?
I think it has to go to finance.
No, that's full committee.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we have the motion and a second to recommend for reporting Senate Bill 506, amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
Yeah. What are you doing?
Aye.
Yeah, it's 2 no's.
One of my 4 colleagues would call that a light eye.
Okay, so that's 506. You have 501.
I do, and this one, I didn't think that one would take that long, but good questions. So this,
That was your easy one, right?
yeah. So this one, this has to do with the VA 529 situation. You all, I think, are familiar with it, Madam Chairman. You wrote an op-ed with me about this about 3 years ago, and oh yeah, I have a substitute, and yeah, I
There's
have
a
it here.
substitute. Second. Moved and seconded that the substitute be adopted. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed? Substitutes before us.
Thank you, and I made some changes. I think Ms. Bergamini made some changes about 6 a.m. this morning, so you all might want to grab a copy of it.
Read it right now.
So I guess it was about 3 years ago, JLARC started a study. 2 years ago, they did a study where they came back and said that the VA 529 plan has a $1.25 billion actuarial surplus. VA 529 disagrees with that, by the way. But I'll just quick for some quick history for how we got there. The VA 529 plan began in 1994 when Congress authorized states to create these college savings plans. I assume everybody understands how these things are, the tax advantages. But over time, a surplus is built up for 2 reasons. One is that because Virginia established its plan so early, they made a contract with American funds to manage the 401k style part of these plans. And Virginia now has one of the largest 529 plans in America because so many people from out of the state are investing in the VA 529 plan. And the management fees from that have created a profit that VA 529 is then banked and is built up over time. The second piece comes from what used to be the Virginia prepaid tuition contracts. So if you had, for example, when your child was born, you could give them like $10,000 and they would agree to pay tuition at any in-state university whenever your child attended. And there ended up being a surplus from that plan. And, the surplus could have come about any number of ways. There's a couple different reasons. Tuition inflation could have stayed low. More people could have chosen like JMU, which is cheaper than William & Mary or something like that than they anticipated. They might have priced it too high at the beginning. Or they just were really, really good at managing the money. Either way, they paid out less money than they anticipated at the beginning. So now, according to JLARC, there's as of a year ago, before the recent market gains, there was a $1.25 billion actuarial surplus. And according to JLARC, what that means is that their independent actuary says they need 125% of their obligations to have a 90% chance of meeting their obligation. 1.25 billion from the independent actuary's perspective covers that. 529 disagrees. In any event, in my meetings with 529, they came back to me and said they agreed that there's at least $500 million, $500 million that is available. They disagree about the remaining $750 million, but they agree about the $500 million. So what I did in my bill was I said, let's take the $500 million, let's drop it into a separate fund under VA 529, call it the Virginia College Opportunity Fund, manage that $500 million in perpetuity for income, and then take the income and use that to create scholarships for people attending our in-state institutions. So under my bill, 90% of it goes to those scholarships, and 10% of it then is income that VA 529 could spend on their existing access programs. They have a program called SOAR, which helps with community college kids, kids in high school, trying to get them on the college track. So 10% of the income would go to that. 90% would then be allocated for these scholarships that this creates. So if you look at the structure, Article 1, it basically creates a new Article 1 under the VA 529 chapter. And then lines 90 through 103 has the language to segregate the $500 million and creates this new Virginia College Opportunity Fund. It also creates a 5-member committee, which would review the actuary report every year and then make a recommendation to the General Assembly, to us, as to whether to transfer additional funds over from the actuarial surplus, if any, into VA 529. So, into the scholarship fund. So it places us in the position of the gatekeeper over whether to transfer more money based on the recommendation. And we could duke that out every General Assembly session or whatever, instead of letting the boards fight it out separately. If you look under line 374, this is the new Article 2 in the code for this endowment. Lines 385 through 389 define the schools that would be eligible for the scholarships. You will note that UVA, Tech, and I believe William & Mary are excluded from that list. The reason they're excluded from the list is because those schools all have multi-billion-dollar endowments, especially UVA. I think Tech's is around $8 billion. Last I checked a year ago, William & Mary is pushing $2 billion, I think. All our other institutions, with the exception of VMI, don't have anywhere close to $1 billion in endowment funds. So that's why I excluded those three. Then lines 422 to 442 create the statutory minimum requirements for scholarships, not the maximum, the minimum. It says every student to get one of these has to be Pell eligible. They have to draw down their Pell Grant. They have to max out their Pell Grant and draw it down before the scholarship pays. They have to enroll at an in-state supported university. They have to agree to remain employed in Virginia for 8 years after they graduate. And then there's also language in there in case exceptional circumstances arise, like somebody gets sick, they get disabled, some life event happens that allows the board to waive the 8-year requirement. Lines 443 to 56 provide authority for the board to be able to access employment and tax information to confirm that people are employed and remain in Virginia. Lines 457 through 476 is the 90-10 split I talked about earlier. And then the last changes create a state income tax deduction for contributions. It's just a lot of existing text. There's like about 10 new words and about 20 pages there. So that's what's at the end. But that's basically what it does. And the reason it excites me is that, if we were to actually take the full $1.25 billion and transfer that over, you could create about 2,000 scholarships a year, complete full rides for people to attend, for Pell eligible kids to attend our in-state universities by my math. And I think this, right now this money's just sitting in an account growing, not doing anything. And I think this is an excellent way to put it to work to help level the playing field, create more access to people all over our state. Pell eligible kids exist all over Virginia. And this is a good way to improve our access. So that's what the bill does, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Servell. I have a question. There are a significant number of Pell eligible students that attend community college. Is there any particular reason why community colleges are not included?
There's a couple. First of all, my understanding, and I'm not as much of an expert in higher ed policy as probably you guys are, or my chief of staff, my new chief of staff who's back here. But my understanding is that the completion rate for people who attend four-year residential institutions is much higher than people who attend community colleges. And so I had a concern that if we did these scholarships for community colleges with all these, you got to do this and that and work for 8 years, that there was a much higher chance of failure and malfunction than if we gave this to people who attended four-year institutions. I was actually talking to the Uber chair about this, and she says the reason that community college kids often don't complete is because they're working one or two jobs at the same time they're trying to go to school, and therefore they have a lot of stuff that gets in the way of them being able to graduate. And so from her point of view, something like this might be able to help. There's a little bit of conflict in that and the way this is structured. There might need to be a little more flexibility with the board if we were to include community colleges in terms of how they would set that up and structure it. And so she and I just started talking about this last night. So that's an issue she has, and I suspect this will continue to be a dialogue if the bill goes forward. But the reason I said at the beginning was the reason I mainly had structured it this way. Plus the VA 529 has their existing program, which I think is mainly focused on community colleges or getting people from the community on there's that program where you go to community college and it puts you on the track to in-state it's focused on getting kids into that track. And so I have 10% of the money going into that, but it doesn't have the same spending requirements. One of the things JLARC asked me to put in this bill, or suggested I put in this bill, is language that requires the money, the income, to be spent. Because right now, the 529's just been sitting on the money, watching it grow and grow and grow, but not doing anything with it. And there's a concern that we need to make sure that whatever board there is has a duty to actually spend it, not just sit on it. And so there's language in there like that. And I'm not sure you must spend this money language applies to the 529 10% community college piece. It might. Ms. Bergamini might know that, but
Senator
it does.
Head.
Yeah, okay, it does. So.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions. First of all, just can you clarify again? I mean, I get this. This is not, just to clarify, this is not the funds, you're not touching any of the 529 funds that are the individual accounts that people have paid into. This is just generated off of the fees. And just to just clarify where this money came from, because this is a lot of money. And the second thing is there anything in this that would facilitate this being used as you said, Madam Chair, the community college is excluded. What about any of the trade schools or anything else? Is this exclusively for baccalaureate pursuit degrees? And why would we be doing that?
The way it's written right now, it's exclusively for for 12 in-state residential colleges right now, the way it's written. And then it's got the 10% money, which they have a lot more flexibility on how to do with that. So that could be trades or community colleges or other thing, whatever they decide on the 10%. So that's how it's structured. The problem is if you start getting into these other schools, then the minimum conditions I put on the scholarships might need to change. And so we could just give it to the board to make up their own mind about what the conditions are, not put any statutory minimums in here, but I didn't like that. So with regard to your first question, Mr. Head, or Senator Head, that gets into the root of a couple of different reasons. This is like the 8th iteration of this. So the way I originally had set this up, wrote it 2 years ago or a year ago, the money went to an independent authority. VA 529 had concerns about the optics of that. And so the way I restructured it was to leave everything under VA 529 so it doesn't leave VA 529. And I think that I agree with them that it's important that we do that. I'm not sure if you followed, but they've had problems with 529s in other states. I'm not allowed to participate in VA 529 because of my wife's employment, and I have to invest in Maryland's plan. In Maryland, they've had a lot of problems. They've actually shut down their plan and moved it somewhere else because they lost track of balances. So that hasn't happened here, and that's not what this is about. That's not what's happened here, and that's not going to happen here. But to answer your question, this doesn't come from anybody's existing balances. They take their management fees and they segregate it actually in their account or whatever, and they take the part that people get confused about is on the prepaid tuition contracts, where you paid like say $10,000 for your 6-month-old, and then at the end they pay it out. That's an actuarial contract. It's like a pension, right? The contract you sign is if I give you 10 now, you'll pay tuition, whatever it is. And actually, if they'd done a bad job or if tuition inflation got out of control, they might have had to come to us and ask us for an appropriation to make up for their poor management, right? That didn't happen. It went the other way. And so the state actually does not owe anybody anything. It's not their money once the contract's been fulfilled, right? Once the tuition's been paid in full, it's been fulfilled. And so this money is left over. And there was some talk, JLARC, one of the things JLARC evaluated is whether to pay any of it back to families or not. And there's all kinds of complexity with that. First of all, paying money back would then become taxable because this is tax-exempt earnings, and then trying to figure out how to allocate the gain between thousands of people and then figure out who gets what, it's a nightmare. And so I thought would be a much simpler solution than getting into all that. The bill 529 put in last year would have allowed them to pay some refunds. And that was they talked to me in their meeting, they said they've decided that's too complicated, they don't want to do that anymore. So it's not anybody's money we're taking out, these are profits generated by, again, surpluses on contracts, and a lot of profits earned by managing out-of-state money. We have all this out-of-state money in our plan because we got in early, and the profits from that. So that's where most of it comes from.
Are there those here who wish to speak in support of Senate Bill 501? Anyone here in opposition to 501?
Madam Chair, thank you. Mary Morris with Virginia 529. And I appreciate the efforts of Senator Servo. We have talked with him, worked on possible substitute language. Unfortunately, the substitute before you today does not address some of the key concerns that we have about this legislation. We do not disagree with the Senator or with JLARC about the opportunity with respect to the Defined Benefit 529 Fund, and that is the trust fund that has been created over 30 years. Started off with funds only from the prepaid 529 program. That's been closed and turned into a different defined benefit program. So we call it now Defined Benefit 529. And over about a 15-year period ending in 2019, some net revenues were allocated to that fund from revenues from the programs that Senator Servo mentioned. So all of that has been invested together. There are liabilities. There's an actuarial formula for that, and that's where the surplus resides. And I will say there are some technical problems with this bill that we can get into if we have to get down that far in terms of references to the plan, which is everything. That does include all of our programs, not just 529 programs. I don't think that's the intent, but it does reference the plan rather than the DB 529 fund. And we've been set up historically with a special non-reverting fund. So it's one overarching fund. A piece of that is the Defined Benefit Fund. Our concerns with this bill goes to the trust fund and the fiduciary responsibilities of the board. And I know the senator has taken some things that were in a separate section in his bill last year that this committee did not move forward. And and put it within our statute, but it still creates conflict within that. There's an independent committee that's created with one member from our board, our investment director, which creates a conflict for that director, the staff directors of the money committees, and a single citizen member. The Virginia 529 board already has 7 citizen members who have to have certain areas of expertise, including finance, legal, actuarial services, education, and the like. So the discussion is about how to administer this fund that was created with respect to the Legacy Prepaid 529 program under the stewardship of the fiduciaries of Virginia 529 board. And the senator's right, it's a complicated mix of assumptions related to pricing, investments, and the impact of tuition inflation. SB 501 creates additional layers of bureaucracy, including this independent committee, a new agency, a new board to administer the scholarship program, and that can overrule the fiduciary judgment of the Virginia 529 board with respect to the trust funds. So it creates some inherent conflicts for us. In recent years, the General Assembly has created 2 entirely new savings programs for disability savings and most recently retirement savings, and could have established new agencies, new infrastructure, new boards to administer those programs, and instead placed your trust in the Virginia 529 board. And I think we've delivered on those promises. So it's difficult to understand why the Assembly would want to break the trust fund that we've administered for almost 30 years and create a what we consider to be a complicated and contradictory system to accomplish a core part of the original mission of Virginia 529, which is educational access and affordability. So, as I said, it supersedes the trust fund. The complexities are cause for concern, and we are concerned about potential reputational harm to our programs. Some of the questions that you asked, Senator Head, go to that. It is confusing. It is complicated. This does not impact in other people's money, but we have almost $90 billion of other people's money that we are administering across multiple programs. And we're talking about a relatively small piece of that. But when you talk about moving it, creating new funds, and again, the structure in this bill is just very difficult to understand how it would be implemented. And so I think that we could get to where the senator wants to be. Should the Assembly want to put 90% of the resources available from this fund to the types of scholarships he mentions, that could be structured, that could be done without dictating movement of funds. And I would just say that to say that the board has been sitting on these funds is inaccurate. They've created a sub-fund with $500 million already. We do require spending authority for that. So we're in the budget, and we've had several instances in recent years where we've had funds that were removed and that authority wasn't granted. So the board is fully prepared to move forward. We are already working with SHEV, with the Department of Education, the community college system, workforce training programs, career and technical training, working in middle schools and high schools on educational access programs as well as scholarship programs. Would love to continue to do that, continue to work with the senator on something that does not impact the trust, but it's the independent committee, this new structure that really breaks the trust that's been created over the 30 years, and we think there's a real chance for reputational harm and confusion among our customers across all of our programs if this bill moves forward. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Who wants to ask it? Senator Pillion.
So we heard this bill last year, Madam Chair. We heard this bill last year, am I correct? Mm-hmm. And I'm hearing the same arguments this year that I heard last year. So when are we going to have a position for you that's agreeable or that you want to move forward? It seems like every year we're hearing the same arguments from you,
Sure.
But there's no progress.
Well, we had a bill last year that, for a variety of reasons, and partly it was because of, I think, the competing interests in these two bills, there is right now a budget-created legislative work group that is supposed to take a look at this again. So we did not attempt to advance legislation this year, waiting on that, because we figured it would just wouldn't work. And that legislative work group is supposed to look at the JLARC report and make recommendations with respect to this fund. So we would have been prepared to move forward. We are prepared to move forward. We have an entire division. Again, we've done the work. We've gotten an access advisory committee that has been working for the last year, I guess, on these proposals to cut across all of that. But without spending authority, without clarity, we can't move forward. And that budget legislative work group really kind of slowed us down. So we have been prepared to work with them this year and hope that that report would support the things that we're proposing. So I think one suggestion would be to ask that they consider Senator Surville's proposal as well in that work group and let that play out over the course of 2024.
Senator Aird.
Madam Chair, I have two questions. Hey, I just wanted to know if you could remind me, in that legislative work group language, when was a sort of outcome supposed to be produced?
Well, in theory, there was going to be an interim report before the end of 2023, but the committee has not been fully formed. We don't have any responsibility for that or any ability to make that happen the way it's set up. There have to be appointments. The governor's made his appointment, I believe. It's still waiting for an appointment from the Senate Finance Chair and the Chair of Appropriations. The other members are the State Treasurer and our Investment Director and Money Committee directors. And then they are supposed to study it during 2024 and make a report by, I think it's November 1st of this year.
So to clarify, Madam Chair, the legislative budget work group was included in the budget to occur, but basically what you're saying is there has been no meeting or no action on that whatsoever.
Correct. I think our understanding from the staff directors was that their report was they didn't have a report yet at the end of 2023. Now, of course, that budget language didn't get adopted until late September, so the appointments and all didn't happen because of budget impasse and the fact that the budget was passed later than it typically is. So they did not have very much time to get moving between when the budget was adopted and the end of 2023. We would anticipate that it would be completed this year, although again, that budget language does not put any responsibility or ability for Virginia 529 to put it together, to have it do its work. We stand prepared to help them and to provide the information that they might need to make recommendations.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Van Valkenburg.
Madam Chair, I was going to ask, JLARC's been referenced like 50 times, if they can come up and maybe assess what's going on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Kimberly Sarte. I'm an Associate Director at JLARC, and I oversaw the study. And I just wanted to say that this bill, SB 501, is very consistent with our study. It implements many of the recommendations of the study. We've been following this issue for many years, and I just looked back last night. Back in 2017 was the first time we raised the issue of this large surplus in the DB 529 fund, and it has continued to grow. And Virginia 529 has been very slow, consistently unwilling to take action with the surplus. They did put in legislation last year, but would have given them full discretion, and it was only after we had released this report. So we feel like this really speaks to the need for legislative involvement, you know, similar to the bill. And, you know, this is, as the Senator had mentioned, this is a lot of money. And so we just really feel the General Assembly should be involved. This is not 529's money. It's government money. They were authorized in statute as a government entity. And so these are public funds that you all should be involved with determining how to use. So we very much, again, feel like this would support, would implement the recommendations in the JLARC report.
Senator Aird.
Senator Serville. Thank you. Senator Serville, can you clear up for me, there was a reference made to a possible conflict that could exist of fiduciary judgment with the existing board advisory committee structure under 529 and what you are structuring with another board and investment advisory committee. In the event of disagreement around the use of funds, who ultimately makes the final decision? I just wanted to clarify that.
We do. The Investment Advisory Committee, all it does is says, the way this is set up now, it says, we think there's like another $100 million that could be transferred over. and then they send a recommendation to the Chair of Finance and Appropriation, and then we would have to put in our budget, move over 100 million or whatever. So we would broker that conflict.
Thank you.
Senator Van Valkenburg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is a question for Senator Servo, but then 529 as well. I mean, the one thing I just want to kind of cross T's and dot I's on if we go forward is the idea that we'll be kind of fiscally sound, right? And that everything will be, we won't be causing monetary problems. So maybe if you could just speak to why that wouldn't be the case, or 529 if you think it would be the case. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you could just speak to that piece maybe a little bit more specifically.
Yeah, so there's some standards in here that the advisory board has to look at in ascertaining and making the recommendations. So if you look on lines, I think it's between 88 and 101. And then starting at lines 94, they have to do this annual report on the current surplus and recommendation on the prudence of directing additional deposits of actuarial surpluses into the fund. And it says, in making the recommendation, the advisory committee shall determine whether the funded status, as defined in 707.1, does not meet or exceed 105%, whether the recommended transfers would violate the standard of care specified in 23.1706, and whether any recommended transfers would result in there being insufficient funds to ensure the actuarial soundness of the plan, or whether it would jeopardize the plan's ability to meet any of its obligations. So they're required to evaluate all those factors in making their recommendation, which are all consistent with fiduciary standards. And so that's why I think I pulled that language out of the JLARC report, I think, 3 years ago. But and I think JLARC helped me write that language back then when I first put this bill in like 2 years ago, or Senator Locke and I put the bill in 2 years ago. So I think that's that's the fiduciary stuff.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. The part that Senator Servo just read is one indication of some of our concerns, the use of that 105% figure. I think that was picked up from a statute that went through about 6 years ago that was a part of an earlier JLARC study. It went to pricing. We don't use that anymore. But it's a bad number. It's a bad number to use as a target. We've questioned the 125%, which is the number in the JLARC report. That's a number that has been thrown about, it's been used by the actuary that does a quadrennial actuarial audit for JLARC, the same actuaries that represented and worked with the Maryland prepaid 529 program. And I know they recommended 125% to them as well. That was a program that was overfunded, the one that the senator has referred to, and it has now been closed because I won't go into the reasons. It's another state. I won't go into that. You can read about that in the press. The problem is when you're not careful with the numbers, and this independent committee that does not have near the expertise, the background, the support that the board has. And that's really our main issue with this. As I said, we haven't objected to JLARC's comments that there is an opportunity for this fund. We've been trying to move along in that respect as well. Just how much it is and how it's determined and how careful you are with preserving that trust for the Commonwealth and our constituents and our customers. Remember, this is still an ongoing program, so the liabilities exist. We have responsibilities going out another 30 or 40 years already. So making decisions today and just determining an amount that is a fixed actuarial surplus is simply a fiction. Actuarial fund status is a moment in time. Our board's done a lot of work this year to create, to look at the risk management part of this, to go beyond just funded status, using a risk-based capital model and stress testing to make sure that any funds that are allocated to whatever access programs might be adopted are appropriate. So that's the challenge, Senator Van Valkenburg. When the language is not exact, when it doesn't take into account all of those trust considerations, we have cause for concern. So again, if the General Assembly wants to make decisions on how those funds are allocated, that is, of course, your jurisdiction. You could simply request that the Virginia 529 board make the same report that this independent committee would make. We do have JLARC oversight. We make reports to JLARC every year and talk about the funded status, the actuarial evaluation. We've noted that we created an access fund that we don't have authority to spend now. So there are ways to get there without creating this additional infrastructure. That's our primary concern with the bill. The independent committee that's set up over and above, that's still sort of a part of us, but is in contradiction in some instances to the board. The same thing with the agency and the rest of it in trying to enforce the provisions of the scholarship program. It appears that Virginia 529 is supposed to staff that, but again, there's not a lot of clarity on some of that. So just have concerns with some of the complexity and that trust piece of it and the fiduciary responsibilities of our board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Senator Aird.
Okay.
Senator Server, I just had one additional question. There was a reference made, or maybe it's for council, that throughout the language, we make reference to the plan, and that has caused confusion as to if we're talking about everything or specifically to what you are structuring. And I just wanted to clarify whether or not that is or is not the case by using that reference.
The plan is defined on line 42 as the Virginia College Savings Plan. So maybe council might have clarity about that.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I was, in looking through the substitute to try to find any ambiguous references to the plan, capital P. Obviously, there's 3 uses between lines 97 and 100, which are all in reference to sections of the code that are about the plan, defined as, at line 42, as said before, yes, line 42, the Virginia College Savings Plan. So I think that is pretty clear and unambiguous. There's one reference in line 134, and it refers to the Virginia College Opportunity Fund established by 23.1-702, which is also in reference to, the plan. And I have to look further, but as of now, I have yet to find a ambiguous reference to the plan that I think is difficult to differentiate between what the intent is to refer to.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Servell, if we could wrap up Senate Bill 501, substitute.
Thank you. Well, I just think a lot of the issues that Ms. Morris has raised are issues that we would have to decide when these recommendations are presented to us, right? If the Investment Advisory Committee says there's $100 million, and then they'll come and say, no, there isn't, and then we can have that argument here. But I don't see that as a conflict with their fiduciary duties. It's just, that's the best way, I think, to resolve this conflict, which you can see has been going on now for 7 years. So I think this bill would create a lot of opportunity for thousands of Virginia young people, and I think we need to do all we can to provide better access, and this is a good way to do it. And I'm happy to continue the conversation about community college and maybe restructuring this a little bit if we need to do that. But we have a House version of this, and we're going to see this a couple more times before we're done. So this has a lot of pit stops to go. So.
Thank you. We have Senate Bill 501, amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I'll move to report.
It's been moved and seconded that Senate Bill 501, amendment in the nature of a substitute, be recommended for reporting. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Okay.
Great.
Thank you, Senator Servell.
Thank you. Appreciate all the
You've taken
time.
up all our morning.
I'm sorry, I appreciate all the time, but it's an important issue, a lot of money here, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Senator Reeves, excuse me one more time. You could take Senator McDougal.
Madam Chairman, thank you so much. Madam Chairman, I thank you for your time this morning. On Senate Bill 717, we had individual asked us to put this in. I was visited by a number of friends through multiple higher education institutions. And some of them had some really great ideas, and I think we might be able to solve the issue that the individual who asked me about this could do. So I'm asking if the committee would consider carrying this over for the year, let them see if they can put those good ideas into practice. But I did want to thank the higher education, I don't even know what you call them. There are multiple representatives from different institutions, a good brain trust to come and come up with solutions.
Thank you, Senator McDougal. Senator Pillion.
Madam Chair, I appreciate the senator bringing this bill forward. It's very important that we continue to work on this in the off season, and I look forward to seeing some progress. And if no progress, I look forward to seeing this bill again next year. So I'll move that motion forward to take it back for the year.
Second. Moved and seconded that Senate Bill 717 be carried over for the year. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, committee, and thank you, Senator Reeves.
Senator Reeves. And you have
Madam Chair, do I get points that I get to vote for now?
And I believe you have a substitute.
Can you believe Surville told me he was going to be short?
And you believed it.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment that HO substitute needs to go before the subcommittee.
A motion on the substitute. Second. Moved and seconded that the substitute be adopted. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed?
Madam Chair, the original intent of my bill was to expand and improve upon the current Virginia Military Survivors and Dependents Education Program by restructuring the program. After some discussion with a lot of the stakeholders, decided it was best to send this thing to a study so we can ensure the remaining concerns with the program are ironed out before this brought back as policy. I think that's probably the best position we can take right now, is to try to get everybody around the table, similar to what Senator McDougal's doing. The bill that the substitutes before you outlines that, who has to be there and what has to happen. The bottom line is the VMESDEP, through collaboration with the Department of Education, Department of Veteran Services, the Joint Leadership Council, and the General Assembly, and so we're just going to try to get everybody at the table.
Thank you, Senator Reeves. Anyone want to comment on moving this from the original to a study? Okay. So we have Senate Bill 347, amendment in the nature of a substitute before us. Second. Moved and second. Senate Bill 347 has been recommended for reporting, amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, thank you. Senator Head,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The last thing on our docket.
Yes, ma'am. Would you like me to go down or stay?
You can stay right there.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I have Senate Bill 418. This is a bill to finally make the Virginia Museum of Transportation, which has existed for many years in Roanoke and is already the official Transportation Museum of the Commonwealth of Virginia, but this would convert them to being a state agency. There are a couple of line amendments, though, I think that council has to
A motion on the
pass out.
amendments? Moved and seconded that the amendments be adopted. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Amendments are adopted, and what do the amendments do?
Madam Chair, the amendments deal with the governor's initial appointments and staggering those so that it just creates the staggering that we need to in the event that we are able to finally get this done, and then also makes a technical change on line 124, changing from at least to no more than, putting a cap on some of the things there. But the Museum of Transportation has done a tremendous amount of work and provides it's a pretty remarkable place if you've never had an opportunity to visit, and it brings in people from all over the world. The Museum of Transportation also is the home of what is also the official steam engine of the Commonwealth of Virginia, the 611, which is the most technologically advanced steam engine that was ever built, designed, constructed, and in existence, and it's been fully restored and does work. But we need to make sure we're continuing to preserve that and the other great work of the Transportation Museum and the highlights that it just makes on various things. And I think we've got somebody here that would like to speak in favor of this. But that's basically the bill. It's pretty simple and one we've seen before.
Okay, I think this is in good shape, so don't ruin it.
No, ma'am. I'm Bill Elwood, representing the Virginia Museum of Transportation. As Senator Head just said, you passed this exact same bill unanimously, 40-0 last year. So I think that's probably all I need to let you know. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Lauren Gilbert, Advantage Strategies on behalf of the City of Roanoke. We thank the patron for bringing this forward, strongly support the bill, and hope it will have the support of the subcommittee. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Randy Pearson with Two Capitals Consulting. On behalf of the Roanoke Chamber of Commerce, we also strongly support the bill. Thank you.
Move to report as substitute.
It's been moved and seconded that amendment in the nature of a substitute for Senate Bill 418 be reported. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That's reported.
The Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia.